My mom is like that.
Wow.
When there's like a little piece of thing that gets on the floor, she's like, she starts cleaning. I'm like, it's just one piece of crumb.
No, don't untrain her how to clean things.
I doubt I don't think it's possible to untrain her.
Well, you can make a big old mess and just keep throwing the same mess in the same spot. Desensitizing.
She got that from my grandmother. My grandmother was a hard worker.
Well, I didn't get that gene.
Although
And neither did my son.
the way she cleaned was she didn't use the broom or the mop.
Oh.
What she did was a small dustpan and dust brush and would crawl around all over the
Oh no, so she's bending over all the time.
Technological advances have brought new forms of victimization. Unfortunately, identity theft, in which information in an individual's personal and financial life is stolen by computer hackers and then used fraudulently. There is a firm that was just hacked about a week ago. And they did, they checked the credit, and people, they hacked, and we don't know who hacked it. We think maybe the Russians did it. This is going to be a big mess. We're talking about, millions and millions of hacks here, or millions and millions of Social Security numbers. Cyber stalking is a technique favored by some sexual predators as a way to target victims. Cyberbullying, of course, can occur through blogs, Facebook, and other social networking sites. We talked about trolling last time. In addition to cyberbullying, psychologists have identified 4 other subtypes of bullying: physical bullying, verbal bullying, social exclusion, shunning, and spreading rumors about people, which I always find funny. As long as, well, males were more likely to be victims of all types of bullying, especially physical bullying. Males bully each other all the time, which is a little strange. Not strange at all. We see this in the animal kingdom as well. Males confronting one another on a fairly continuous basis. Dogs will fight, tomcats will fight, and of course this seems to be something genetic. It has something to do with testosterone. We're not exactly sure what the testosterone is. This chapter concentrates on 4 types of victims and the effects of victimization on them. People who experience adversity and trauma in childhood. So we're going to talk about childhood trauma. Targets of sexual harassment, primarily females, but sometimes males. Battered spouses. Victims of violent crime, particularly rape. The crime that has been studied most often is rape, for one reason or another. My sister went through law school in the early 1970s. And while she was going through law school, one of her areas of concentration was sexual harassment, child abuse, and rape. And of course, while she was in, I told you this story before, when she was in law school, she wanted to pass a law that made rape a capital crime. In other words, people would be executed for raping people, which is kind of an interesting thought. I couldn't go along with that. I was thinking, oh my God, you're going to execute this guy just for doing
But
something.
isn't rape hard to convict or prosecute?
Oh, it's almost, yeah, it's very difficult because it's usually a one-on-one situation, and there are no eyewitnesses. So there's nobody to corroborate the fact that it was. And the question usually comes up: was it consensual or was it actually forced? The relationship between traumatic childhood experiences and physical and emotional health outcomes in adult life is at the core of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study. Adverse Childhood Experiences. The ACE study involved the study of people who experience recurrent physical and emotional abuse, contact sexual abuse. In other words, there was touching taking place. An alcohol or drug abuser in the household, an incarcerated household member, a household member who is chronically depressed, mentally ill, institutionalized or suicidal, a mother who is treated violently, one or no parents, emotional or physical neglect. Talking to my wife, she went through something fairly traumatic when she was a child. Her mother was depressed, was clinically depressed, and she would control her family with her symptoms of depression. And because of that, of course, it changed her outlook on things. My wife was very lucky because she was a daddy's girl. And because she was a daddy's girl and daddy was normal, she identified with a normal member of the family. However, her sister was a mama's girl. And her mother was nutty as a fruitcake, since her mother was depressed. She took on the symptoms of her mother, which was kind of sad. There was also a male in the family, and he didn't identify with either the mother or the father. And because of that, he suffered from, he identified with both his mother and father, and because of that, of course, he had a problem as well. The mother she developed cancer. It was pancreatic cancer, which is almost always fatal, like 95% fatal. They told her that they could prolong her life for a couple more months with treatment. And she refused treatment. And so she died about 6 months earlier than she would have if she had accepted treatment. So when her daughter developed kidney disease, she was diabetic. When she developed kidney disease, they told her with dialysis, we can prolong your life for an extended length of time. We can use dialysis and you can live for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And her daughter had just had a baby, but instead of accepting the dialysis, she decided, just like her mother did, that she would not accept treatment and she would die younger than she would have otherwise, which seems suicidal to me. I'm sorry, it seems suicidal to me. But, and her daughter had just had a baby. She just had a new granddaughter, and she rejected a longer life to be with her granddaughter. As stupid as that sounds.
Maybe she just wanted to not suffer, let them suffer with her. Just let it take its course.
I don't know. She was medically knowledgeable.
Oh, okay.
She was medically knowledgeable, but the one thing she didn't understand was how much suffering she would do without the dialysis. And boy, I'll tell you what. She went into a coma and she came out. She went into a coma and came out. It was ugly. Just an ugly situation. Crazy people. Okay. The ACE study has 2 major findings. Adverse childhood experiences are much more common than anticipated or recognized. So there's a lot more kids out there that are being abused than is recognized. My wife wasn't. This wife wasn't. Wow. But my 2 previous wives were. I told you about my second wife. She was sexually molested by her brother. My first wife was emotionally abused by her mother, which was a little strange. So the whole family turned out a little weird. So this is a lot more common than we assume. There are fewer normal families out there than we realize. So there are a lot of individuals that are suffering, a lot of children out there that are suffering that we don't recognize. Adverse childhood experiences have a strong relationship with health outcomes later in life, as it turned out with my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law, of course, she developed diabetes. For a while she was controlling her diabetes with her diet, but then she just kind of decided not to anymore and started drinking a lot of alcohol. And at that stage everything was pretty much, she was fairly suicidal. I mean, it's really an odd situation. So we know that adverse childhood experiences can lead to negative health outcomes in the future. Wyndham in 1989 and also in 1992 found that abused or neglected children were significantly more likely than a comparison group to have been arrested for violent crimes as juveniles or as adults. So not only are there health issues in the future, there are also criminal issues in the future. They tend to be juvenile delinquents, as it were. striking out against society. Society didn't protect me from my mother/father, so I'm going to strike out against society. One of the ways they usually start out is by vandalizing things. They're big on vandalizing things, destroying cars. When I was young, one night I decided that, oh shoot, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to go out with these guys and have a good time. So we were driving around, and they stopped beside a church, and they were popping people's tires with a switchblade. And I was thinking, why? Why would you do that? Why would you slash somebody's tires? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And that's the last time I ever rode with those guys. I'm a hood. Brian's going, oh my God, you're a criminal. I didn't pop anybody's tires, thank you very much. I don't know if I could. It's not easy to punch a hole in the tire. Sorry?
That's gangster.
Gang violence, yeah, there's something wrong with it. Recently, many have acknowledged the need to recognize and serve crime victims. For example, since the late 1970s, the interdisciplinary field of victimology has emerged, and you can study this, and it's a branch of psychology. It's known as victimology. There's an increasing availability of services to crime victims, including compensation. Not every state has compensation, however. There is expanded opportunity for victims to participate in the trials of their victimizers. There's a heightened focus on victims brought about by new journals, such as Violence and Victims, and of course, they talk about some of the negative things that can happen to victims and the fact that you need to take care of these people. In the past, of course, we just forgot about it. We threw the criminal in jail, we didn't worry about the victim. But now, of course, there's a whole field of psychology dealing with people that are victims of violent crime. The problem is, of course, if you've been raped or you've been assaulted, physically assaulted, there will be some degree of PTSD potentially later on. And of course, we need to deal with that rather than just arresting the criminal. One of the things that happens to you, one of the things that may potentially happen to you is you're going to have to go to court and testify. And of course, your abuser or the individual that raped you is going to be sitting there looking at you, and of course they're going to say negative things about you. And of course, this is part of the difficulty of dealing with a criminal situation like this. What's the probability of this person being prosecuted? Is there danger of this individual coming back and retaliating against me for accusing them of the crime that they committed? Is it possible that this individual is going to injure me in the future, or kill me, for that matter? I guess that's injury. Individuals who suffer a severe trauma and later experience intense fear-related reactions when reminded of the trauma may be experiencing, of course, post-traumatic stress disorder. By definition, such trauma must involve a threat of serious injury or death, the fear that it's going to happen to you, or may potentially happen to you. And that is PTSD. And we're going to talk more about PTSD in just a second. This is what PTSD looks like. 3 symptoms of PTSD fall into 3 categories. Symptoms must last longer than a month. Usually PTSD does last for an extended length of time. Frequent re-experiencing of the event, and these are known as flashbacks, or repeated nightmares. Has anybody ever had a dream that they've had over and over and over again? It doesn't have to be a bad dream. Was it a bad dream? Was it a bad dream?
Mine, the recurring dream I always have is the one where I'm stuck in a mirror. I touch a mirror and I get sucked in and I can't get out.
Oh my goodness gracious.
And it starts filling up with water, and then I wake up right before I
Does anybody have the naked dream? The dream where you're out in public and you're naked and you're not exactly sure why you don't have your clothes on?
Or you and you realize you don't have shoes. I have that dream too.
The shoes?
The shoeless dreams.
Who cares if you don't? I usually go out in public without shoes. I'm sorry, if that's the extent of your naked dream, then that's fine. No, I told you about a dream I had the other day. The other day where I was someplace and all of a sudden I realized I didn't have any pants on. And I'm wandering around going, what the hell did I do with my pants? Oh, it was coming to class. I was coming to class.
This class?
I don't know, it was just it wasn't even at this institution, it was like at NAU.
Oh, okay. That's good.
It was like at NAU. And I'm wandering around, and of course I just arrived there, and here I am. I went to my office, and when I left, I forgot something, so I had to go back to my office, and I couldn't find my office. And then at some stage, while I'm looking for my office, I lost my pants, and I couldn't figure out where they were. So I'm thinking, I need to go back to my office and get some pants. Like there's any pants in my office.
Pants in your office?
I know, that was the weird part. I couldn't find my office, and I'm naked. I mean, it was just, that was this morning, really. That happened to me. Well, it all stems from I forgot my belt the other day, so instead of, I just fastened my coat up so that nobody can see that I've forgotten my belt. You forget things from time to time. Not because I'm old, okay? It's not because I'm old. Okay, but I do have these dreams. Right after I was in the military, I kept having that dream about running through the jungle, being chased by Viet Cong, jumping up and shooting my rifle at them. I had them in my sights, pulled the trigger, and the bullets dripped out of the end of my gun. I know, that's a horrible dream. Oh my God, what have I done? So instead of shooting at them, it's like a squirt gun. Oh, it's horrible. Horrible dream. And they're laughing at me with their AK-47s ready to blast me into oblivion. Didn't happen to me. Persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the trauma and a general numbing of deadening of emotions. So we are trying to stay away from all this stimuli that has to do with the trauma. So, if you're military, you try to stay out of combat. My brother started suffering from PTSD at the end of his tour, and he would go, they would call for everybody to go out to the firing line, and he would, the perimeter, and he was in charge of an M60 machine gun. You know what that is? It's just a machine gun, 30 caliber machine gun. Anyway, he would go out there without any ammunition. So, yeah, I know, as stupid as that is. But yeah, some of the horrible things that my brother had to do, he ambushed people with knives and whatnot. So that was, I don't know, he's a little weird. Kind of dangerous. And we worried about him for a while. I worried about him for a while. My parents didn't worry about him, but I worried about him for a while. Increased physiological arousal resulting in exaggerated startle response or difficulty in sleeping. And a lot of times individuals who are suffering from PTSD will use something to get themselves to sleep, and one of the things that they use, of course, is alcohol. There is a medication that they can take that will knock them out, not allow them to go into, that's a horrible picture. Anyway, that won't allow them to go into deep delta wave sleep. So how common is PTSD? The lifetime prevalence of PTSD among adult Americans was estimated to be about 6.8%, and this was by Kessler in 2005. So that included the individuals coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, only the beginning of the people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. This included all the people that were in the Vietnam War, so in 2005. The problem, of course, is that about 5 years ago, the number of people that died in Vietnam was like 57,000. There were 8 million men served in Vietnam. Of those 8 million men, more than 57,000 of them have committed suicide. Well, of course, it's been 45 years. That's a long time ago. But we have more suicides than we have individuals who actually died in combat. With 3.6 prevalence for men and 9.7% for women. Women tend to have PTSD more than men do because of sexual assault and rape. PTSD is more commonly experienced in military veterans than by those in the general population. And of course, that is because of the traumatic experiences of combat. Who is more likely to develop PTSD? Military service is a risk for PTSD, of course. You didn't have to be in combat in order to suffer from PTSD. I know individuals that spent their entire military career as clerks in some fairly secure areas. These individuals, of course, if they were in a combat zone, there's always a danger. There's always a danger. One of the things that happened to me when I was in Vietnam was they had a rocket attack one night and it hit the medical dorm at Tan Son Nhut and killed, I don't know, 27 people or something. Of course, these were individuals that were working in the hospital. These were medics that were working in the hospital. They really didn't go out into a combat area, but of course after that, that's one of the things that happened. So no matter whether you were theoretically in a combat zone or not, you could be in Saigon. This is during Vietnam, of course. In Iraq and Afghanistan, you could be in the green zone. The green zone was attacked practically every night. Mortar attacks and rocket attacks and whatnot. So it really didn't matter. All you needed to do was be in the military, and potentially PTSD was a possibility.
Can that also happen to people that are in like hostage situations after they get out of a hostage situation? Can they
Right.
possibly be? Okay.
Exactly. The extent of injury during trauma predicts whether PTSD symptoms will develop. This individual, for example, he's wounded. This guy's trying to help him, but this individual has a head wound and he has a wound on his hand. He's more likely to develop PTSD than this guy is. The belief that the victim's life is in danger and that he or she has no control over the trauma increases the risk for PTSD. And that's usually where the PTSD comes from, is the danger of death. That they are in danger or they are in danger of death. And of course, whether you're in the green zone in Baghdad or whether you're in Kabul, there's always a possibility of IEDs and whatnot. So somebody with a truck bomb exploding the bomb, of course. Exploding the truck and destroying where you live. If you've ever been in an explosion, you know what I'm talking about. It's really loud, you can't hear anything afterwards. Your ears start ringing. And they don't stop ringing for about, I don't know, sometimes they never stop ringing. Mine are still ringing, by the way. So if I can't hear you, Sheldon's talking to me from the back of the room. I've got this thing making noise, and I've got tinnitus. And I've had it ever since I was in the military. I just can't get rid of it. This constant ringing, what's wrong? Note that although many persons who experience severe trauma may develop acute stress disorder, trauma-related symptoms that last less than a month, most do not go on to develop PTSD. And the degree of PTSD that I've had over the years, very minimal, very minuscule, mainly because I felt like, it has to do with feeling like you're in danger or that you're going to die. And I've never really felt that way. I've never been that afraid. I was stabbed I've stabbed a couple times, but I never felt like I was going to die either time. I was shot once by my neighbor in the hip. I didn't think I was going to die. I have this feeling that I'm going to live forever. Most people recognize their mortality. I don't. I'm going to live forever. You guys, lucky you, I get to live forever. Anyway, so I haven't developed PTSD because I think that I'm infallible, that I'm immortal, like some kind of Wolverine or something from some comic book. One reason may be that those experiencing trauma but not PTSD tend to receive high levels of social support immediately following the event. And of course, if you're in the military, you are in a unit and your unit has survived and all those people are helping each other. One of the things we discovered from Vietnam was the longer you stayed in the service, the less likely you were to develop PTSD.
Could that
And it was
be
made, I'm sorry?
Could that be social support
Within the military, sure.
within,
Not only,
like for the Vegas shooting? I know that's, or still mourning, or like, I don't know if they would develop PTSD, but they have that support within the community, but also nationwide. Could that type of support
I'm guessing not.
help?
I'm guessing not, probably. You need somebody close to you that understands what you've gone through. And that's one of the reasons why the military is such a wonderful organization, because all the people around you have been in the same shit that you've been in. So, and you can talk to them about your problems. So the individuals, organizations like VFW and the American Legion, combat veterans would go there and they would, swap stupid stories. Most of them were lies, but that's not important. It was the fact. It was the fact that you were able to dissipate your fears. You had somebody to talk to who had been through the same stuff that you'd been through. And this was especially important with World War I, World War II. Vietnam, not especially. They didn't invite Vietnam vets to come into those organizations because we lost the war. We lost the war in Vietnam. Korean War veterans, they were, which was a draw, by the way, but they were invited to come in, but Vietnam vets were not invited to come in. Besides that, a lot of them were against, they were anti-military after they got out of the service, but we had a lot of individuals that were drafted during Vietnam. They were only stayed in for 2 years, and those are the individuals that suffered the worst PTSD from that. I'm going to talk more about who develops PTSD in just a second. As it turns out, individuals who have been through a trauma prior to combat are more likely to develop PTSD. As strange as that seems, I don't know why this thing. I don't have the internet. Yes, thank you very much. All right. Those who develop PTSD often perceive the world as a dangerous place from which they must retreat, and they come to view themselves as helpless to deal with stressors. I have lots of friends who have done exactly what that crazy guy that shot up Las Vegas did. They've got tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition. They have a house full of weapons. My own brother probably has 4 military weapons. They're old World War II weapons, but still they're military weapons. I don't think he could shoot up any place. He doesn't have enough ammunition. But I have an individual he graduated from high school with, served 20 years in the service. He was a tanker, and now the guy's house looks like a fortress. And when I talked to him about it on Facebook, he had no explanation for it. He lives in a dangerous world. His world is far more dangerous than mine is, despite the fact that he lives in a gated community. He's white. He lives in a gated community, and all the people that would potentially want to take anything from him live very far away from him. He lives in a gated community out in a rural part of Delaware County. So he has less to fear than anybody does, potentially. Yet he lives in a dangerous world because that's the way he sees things. And he talks about it all the time. He also voted for Trump because, I don't know, Trump promised he was going to protect everybody, I guess. He's going to protect everybody from the immigrants. All those dangerous immigrants coming in. Foa et al. In 1995 have developed a course designed to attack these misconceptions in women who have been raped or assaulted. The fact that they live in a dangerous world. You can lock yourself in the house for the rest of your life and never come out if you want, and that will protect you from the dangers that you have seen in the past. But of course, FOA in 1995 has come up with a way to deal with this. In FOA's course, she has come up with different ways of dealing with it. Education about common psychological reactions to assault, so victims see that their responses are normal. Overreacting to a dangerous situation like this is very normal. But you need to understand that it is overreacting, and that the world isn't as dangerous as you see it. Training in skills such as relaxation, emotionally reliving the trauma to allow victims to diffuse the fears of the trauma. One of the things that we know that works, and we know this works because we have dealt with this in combat veterans, is that the more they talk about it, the less likely that they're going to fear it. So that's one of the things that we have them do, and that's one of the reasons that the VFW worked, that's one of the reasons that the American Legion worked, that's one of the reasons that people that stayed in the military didn't have nearly as much, didn't suffer from PTSD nearly as much, because they dealt with these situations. They talked about these situations. The bullet came this close to my head. I don't know if you've ever heard a bullet zipping past your head. It does make a sound. You can hear it. Even if you don't hear the gun go off, you can still hear the bullet going past your head. The closer it is, the louder it is. And it's scary as hell, as you can imagine. And the first thing you think about is, wow, if I'd gone over like this, I'd be dead right now. And that's true. You've been over there. I told you the story about one time I leaned over and the guy behind me got shot in the head. Did I tell you that story? I was in a helicopter. I'm not a very tall person, so I could almost stand up in a Huey. I just had to bend over a little bit. Well, there's this really tall guy, and he was in the Huey, and he was standing up behind me. And I bent over, the gunner was saying something to me, the door gunner, and I leaned over like this so that I could hear him. And about that time, a round came in and hit that guy right in the middle of the forehead, blew his brains out. I know, how lucky is that? If I hadn't leaned over, I'd be dead. I don't think he was targeting me, I was only like this way. Anyway, okay. So the more you relive these things, the less traumatic they become. Cognitive restructuring to help women replace negative beliefs about their competence and their adequacy. Of course, this is after sexual assault and rape. Victims who had completed FOA's prevention course had fewer PTSD symptoms than control subjects who had not received treatment. So we know that it works with select individuals. Prevalence rates estimates suggest that 33% of men and 25% of women have been involved in a physically aggressive altercation. They've been in a fist fight sometime in their lives. They've been threatened with a weapon sometime in their lives. 33% of men, 1 out of every 3 men, and 25% of women, 1 out of every 4 women have been physically assaulted. Although in relationships, female to male aggression is as frequent as male to female aggression, male aggression is significantly more likely to result in serious injuries. Women attack men just as frequently as men attack women. The difference is women usually can't do that much damage. But if you're smart like my first wife was, she used a baseball bat, she used boiling water, she hit me with a pan in the head one time, and of course you all know the story about when she stabbed me twice in one day. As stupid as that is. Now you ask the question, why didn't I do something about it the first time she stabbed me? Why didn't I go to the police? Why didn't I do something? I was trying to protect my children. That was my idea. What would have happened if I had gone to the police? I was living on base. What would have happened if I'd gone to the cops? They would have removed her from the base. They would have banned her from the base.
Would you have been charged if it was...
And I would have been charged, yeah, for not controlling my wife. Not controlling my dependent. About 30% of all women murdered in the United States each year are killed by their male partners. About 30% of all the women murdered in the United States every year are murdered by the man that loves them. How about that? Isn't that cute? Their partners. They're murdered by their partners. Folingstad in 1994 identified the following myths. Battered women are masochists. Everybody knows that. Battered women like it. They provoke the assaults inflicted on them. They goad them and goad them and goad them until they finally attack them. They get the treatment that they deserve. They deserve all the smacks in the face and all the black eyes and all the knocked out teeth. They are free to leave these violent relationships anytime they want to. We've all read the book 50 Shades of Grey. No, we haven't. Has anybody read 50 Shades of Grey? That man's nuts. I don't know. Why in the hell would anybody put up with that crap? I don't know. So now, what is the idea? Who wrote that book? Was it a woman that wrote the book, or was it a male that wrote the book? Who's the author of 50 Shades of Grey? Is it a guy?
I think it was a woman.
I'm sorry?
I think it was a woman.
A woman wrote the book. Okay.
I think it's
She's written another book, hasn't she? Aren't there 2 or 3 in the series? There's 3 in the series? 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Darker Shades of Grey, I don't know.
50 Shades Darker.
50 Shades Dark.
The other series.
So are women really free to leave anytime they want to leave? And the answer is obviously no. Violence among intimate partners is not uncommon. Is not common. It doesn't happen very often, only in books and in Playboy magazine. Men who are nonviolent in their dealings with outsiders behave the same way in their dealings with their intimates, and that's not right. Middle and upper class men don't batter, and middle and upper class women don't get beaten. That isn't true either. That's another myth. Battering is a lower class ethnic minority phenomenon, and such women don't mind because it's part of their culture, and of course that's a myth as well. Good battered women are passive and never try to defend themselves, and of course that is a myth as well. What are the causes of battering? Batterers are more likely than non-batterers to be unemployed, to be less well educated, to be members of a minority group, to be of lower socioeconomic status, to have suffered physical abuse as children, or saw an abusive relationship between their parents. And this has become a part of their definition of what love is. Physical abuse has become part of that definition. I told you the story of my first wife. She wanted me to hit her. And I didn't want to. I didn't find it sexually exciting to hit somebody. But of course, and that's one of the reasons why I wasn't cool. She ran off with a cool guy, and I wasn't that guy. She ran away from me because I wasn't a cool fellow, because I wouldn't punch her. So her next boyfriend was a cowboy, and he wailed the tar out of her. She just thought he was just the most wonderful person in the world. And then after she left him, she started dating a truck driver, and he beat her the crap out of her. She started losing teeth at this point. Anyway, it's kind of interesting. The next guy she was with was a railroad worker, Mexican railroad worker. And he was the sweetest guy in the whole wide world. She didn't stay with him very long because he wasn't very cool. I know, so the reason that she liked that kind of stuff is because it was part of the way she grew up. She was taught that her parents used to tell her, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you, when they punished her. And she thought that was love. They told her it was love. Why? I guess that was her definition. And of course, I grew up in a different household that was obviously all screwed up, because we didn't know what love was, so we never hit anybody. I used to punch my brothers all the time, but I'm not sure I even liked them. Adolescents who later become batterers have experienced a higher rate of conduct problems and are more likely to have engaged in early substance abuse, have early experiences with coercive or aggressive behavior that may set the stage for similar strategies in adult relationships. The people that are the most likely to abuse are adolescents. And that's because they don't really understand how this is supposed to work. Usually they will they will grow out of that. But of course, if alcohol is involved or drugs are involved, then all bets are off. They regress back to an earlier time when they were abusive. Batterers usually have poor self-concepts. They're not very good at problems. They're not very good problem solvers. Very often they have limited verbal skills. They are prone to extreme jealousy, thus they monitor their partner's activity closely and exert excessive control over their partner's whereabouts. They overreact to signs of rejection and alternate between rage and desperation. Waltz et al. In 2000 revealed these distinct types of batterers. Individuals that are generally violent, they're violent all the time, they're violent with everybody. The psychopathological violent person, and of course that's what we saw with the shootings in Las Vegas, and the individuals that are only violent with their families. These groups were distinguished by the degree of violence within the relationship and the degree of general violence reported, as well as by personality characteristics. So Waltz has identified the three. This is profiling. The cycle of violence. Tension building phase characterized by increased criticism of the partner and perhaps even minor physical assaults. Punching them, pushing them usually. That is the first phase. The second phase is the actual battering that takes place. The woman has become too dependent on the man to break off the relationship easily, of course, so he can be violent with her without fear of losing her affection or whatever. And then, of course, so the tension builds up, and he pushes her, and then he hits her, and then after that he's contrite. After that he tries to apologize. It will never happen again. The batterer apologizes for his attacks, promises never to do it again, and persuades the woman that he is a changed man. He's a changed man. I had a student, she was just a young pup, she was only like 16 or 17. She was in college because she had graduated, she was smart, she was really smart. But she had graduated from high school with a GED. When she was a sophomore, she decided she didn't want to go to high school anymore. It was too strange, the boys were too weird. So she decided to get her GED, and she did, and she started college almost right away. Anyway, she came from a family where the mother and the father, they only had the one child, but they would fight over her all the time. It was really kind of an odd situation. So the mother would keep the daughter from the father because she was trying to punish the father. So they were actually using this child as a pawn. Really kind of an odd situation. So the reality was that she didn't think her mother loved her, and she didn't think her father loved her because they were always fighting over her. So she always had to have a boyfriend. Always had to have a boyfriend, not just today. I mean, she always had to have a boyfriend. So if she never, there was always somebody living with her. Always somebody living with her. So she had this one boyfriend for an extended length of time, about a month, or maybe two. And one time she came to school with a black eye, and I asked her what was going on. I knew that she was only a young person, and I also knew, she told me the story of her mother and her father, and I knew that she was relatively fragile as far as affection was concerned. So I asked her, well, what happened? Well, she said, well, her boyfriend had gone out the night before, and his friends had given him whiskey. And anytime he had whiskey, he became violent. And she said, don't worry, it'll never happen again. He'll never drink whiskey again. He knows that this happens, and of course it'll never happen again. About 2 weeks later, she had given him the whiskey this time. And he hit her again. And I said, you can't put up with this because it's just going to happen over and over and over again. And she said, yeah, I know, but he promised me it's never going to happen again. Of course, the third time that it happened, it was his friends again that gave him the whiskey, came home, and this time she kicked him out. Which I found really kind of weird because she came to school the next day and she had hickeys all over her neck. And I'm thinking, wonder what's going on? Well, what had happened? She kicked the guy out, and as soon as the guys in town heard that, she had him lined up outside her door. But Anyways, she let somebody in. Anyway, they gave her hickeys all over her.
It wasn't me.
Her new, and then eventually, yeah, you look guilty though. Right? Eventually, of course, she got back with the first guy that had blacked her eye 3 times. Anyway, but she was a fighter. She was kind of an interesting individual. Anyway, she went through this whole stage over and over and over again. The second time, she had actually goaded the guy by giving him whiskey. That's this tension stage. And then, of course, he had beaten her and promised her that he would never do it again. At least that's what she kept telling me. Eventually, everything worked out fine. She finally found a guy that wasn't a whiskey drinker, and she got married and had a baby, so everything's fine. Walker, 1979, identified the cycle of violence in about 2/3 of the 400 women that she studied. The cycle of violence. As many as 40% of batterers have the features of borderline personality disorder, a severe disturbance that is characterized by unstable moods and behavior. If you know anything about borderline personality disorder, it's a push-me, pull-me problem. This individual, if you love them, then they reject you, and if you reject them, then they have to have you. It's one of those kind of pathological situations. But these individuals tend to, frequently these individuals tend to be batterers, individuals with borderline personality disorder. You can never make them happy. They're never happy. They're always in flux. Their life is a constant chaos. Why? Well, if you love them, then they reject you, and if you reject them, then all of a sudden you can't get them to leave you alone. It's really an odd situation. So what will guys do if the female has borderline personality disorder? This is really, some men look for women with this problem. They're looking for women that have borderline personality disorder. Remember, they reject you if you love them, they reject you. If you reject them, then they love you to death and they can't get enough of you. So how would guys treat these women?
Leave me alone.
I'm sorry. Yeah, bad. Yeah, exactly. They're constantly rejecting you. All they have to do is reject you, and they know that that they got you forever. Does that make sense? All right. And there are men that seek out women like this so that they don't have to be nice to them. And of course, the men become batterers of the women. But of course, if they ever show them affection, you know, all bets are off. All of a sudden, all bets are off. Somebody gets shot. And these women will shoot their significant others if you're not careful. So you have to give them just enough affection to keep them from pulling a gun on you, and then, you know, they're perfect girlfriend after that. A deep uneasiness, even hostility exists towards some victims of battering. When battered women kill their batterers, they may receive a greater punishment than men who commit acts with similar outcomes. It's difficult to assess because the circumstances may be quite different. It's really kind of odd. You would think that women would feel sympathy for an individual that was being battered. But the burning bed, the woman that kills her abuser, is very often treated worse. They get more time in prison. They get life sentences. Sometimes they're put on death row because they have retaliated against the man that was beating them. It sounds like self-defense to me, but a lot of juries don't see it that way. Does this make any sense? Can you see a rationale for punishing these women more than a common murder?
Maybe they thought that they could get up sooner.
I'm sorry, what?
Maybe they thought they could get up sooner before it actually happened, and that's why they think they're more guilty.
So they're blaming the woman as much as they're blaming her.
Yeah,
Okay.
for not getting up sooner, yes. Maybe that's what I'm looking at anyway.
Okay. Interesting. Anybody else have a theory as to why these women get punished worse?
Does it matter the way in which they kill them? It's really bad.
That's a good point. A lot of times it's relatively violent. and it's premeditated.
I was gonna say, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's premeditated.
Exactly. Yeah. And premeditated murder, of course, is first-degree murder in some states, depending on what state you're in. So because it's premeditated, it has to be, they have to try them with,
There was one like that in Phoenix
is that right?
2 years ago. They let the lady go.
Oh, they let her go.
Kind of. Well, like, I think it was probation.
They put her on
rather than
probation.
Life sentence.
Don't kill anybody while we're.
That one, she went all out on the guy.
What'd she do?
She decapitated him and
Wow,
the whole.
pretty pissed off, huh?
Yep.
It's kind of hard to exonerate somebody for decapitating someone. It's just a thought.
It's hardcore.
What did she? Yeah, hardcore. What did she use to decapitate the guy? A sword?
I don't know. It was kind of like this. They would go all 50 Shades of Grey, and
Uh-huh.
then
Oh.
she ended up doing that.
Oh, okay.
I think it was at their home.
Wow.
I forgot what it was called.
50 Shades of
The
Grey.
lady, got her name. That was like 2 years ago in Phoenix.
She decapitated the guy. Wow. Fascinating.
I'll see if I can look it up.
My wife used to accuse me of being abusive. That was her excuse for being so violent. Of course, I never did anything. If I was abusive, why didn't she have any marks on her? That's not fair. Why was I the one with burned ears, baseball bat upside the head? Baseball bats are hard. Okay, we're not talking about a wiffle ball bat, okay, one of those plastic suckers? No, this was a baseball bat. Anyway,
Would it
okay,
matter too if they were married?
You wouldn't think that it would make any difference. The first case that they wrote a book about was the burning bed, where the lady put up with his abuse enough to the extent that he was drunk one night, came home, raped her, beat her up. He passed out in bed, and then she poured gasoline on the bed and lit the bed on fire and killed him. The burning bed, that's why I referred to it as the burning bed. There's actually a movie with Farrah Fawcett in it, where she's the lady that flames her husband, I guess, as odd as that seems. Anyway, any other theories as to why these women are punished more?
I asked that because I know we talked about how a lot of the judges, like, they're with a certain religion, church.
Right. Oh, good point. Yeah, that's a
You know
good
what I
point.
mean? So,
Well, and that may have something to do with it as well. Society can't tolerate. What society wants is women to stay with their husbands. They need that in order for social cohesiveness. So it may be that society, does this make any sense? So society is rejecting the idea of the woman being violent toward the man because they need that social cohesiveness. They want, families. They want families to stay together. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's social, right? So it's an idea of the society needing to stay together. So they punish the woman for doing something that society can't accept, rejecting her husband.
So would you say that if someone's unmarried and they're just dating, not married, they would probably get stiffer punishment because of that? Looking at it as more of a marriage kind of situation?
In the old days, a husband could do anything that he wanted to his wife, and that's one of the reasons why they didn't. There's no spousal rape and whatnot. He could beat her up. If you've ever seen the movie The Quiet Man about Ireland, John Wayne, really interesting movie because in the end he gets angry with her because she has rejected him because he hasn't fought with her brother. He hasn't beat her brother up. It's an odd movie. It has to do with Ireland and Irish social customs. But at one point in the movie, he is walking with his wife, taking her back to her brother. He's going to give his wife back to her brother. And a lady comes up to him with a stick and says, "Here's a nice stick to beat the lovely lady with." which is, and you know, that's part of their social custom, is the fact that you can hit a woman all you want. Of course, that's in Ireland. But it was made by an American director, and John Wayne, of course, was an American. All the actors in it were actually in the United States. They weren't in Ireland. Some of them were Irish, though. But I mean, that was a social moray. The social moray was that you can do anything that you want. And maybe that has something to do with it as well. So the more traditional areas, if you're in Utah, where Mormon religion is very powerful, potentially their laws would see it differently than somebody in New York City, where the laws are different and the religious structure is different. In the conservative South, you know, maybe it would be the same way. Maybe they are far more conservative than other individuals. Therefore, their social mores are totally different, and they would not want to see a woman striking out at her husband. It's okay if the husband strikes out at her, beats her up, and whatever. Anyway, just a thought. Okay, so we know that these individuals are punished more severely than other individuals that murder someone. The Battered Women syndrome is defined as a collection of symptoms and reactions by a woman to a pattern of continued physical and psychological abuse inflicted on her by her mate. And this is known as the Battered Women syndrome. Lenore Walker in 1984 emphasizes the following elements of the Battered Women syndrome. As a result of chronic exposure to repeated battering, the woman develops a sense of learned helplessness. She comes to believe that there is nothing that she can do to escape. And of course, we talked about learned helplessness before. Learned helplessness is not that new. It's fairly old, but we weren't applying it to women. We weren't applying it to the marriage until the women's movement in the 1970s. We knew that learned helplessness existed, but of course they argued that this couldn't happen in a loving relationship. But the reality is, of course, it can. And she learns that there's nothing that she can do to escape. This is one of the things that was happening to my daughter down in Florida. Even separating herself from the individual that was her abuser, she still was afraid of it. She was afraid of staying in Florida because she was afraid that he would retaliate. She was living in an area, of course she's military, so she was living in an area, she doesn't have an area to live in. She can't go someplace where all the people that they know are her friends. They were living in his community, and because it was his community, she was afraid that his friends would retaliate against her and potentially something negative would happen. So she was suffering from learned helplessness to some extent. And even on Friday when they were mediating her custody hearing, she was afraid to do something that he didn't want. And one of the things he didn't want, of course, was to pay back child support, which is a lot of money. $10,000. It's only $10,000. Is that all just $10,000? No, it's hardly any.
So is that why in practices that women that are retired when they come to jail because they don't say anything?
Right.
And so
They think they're wrong.
yeah, so
They will admit to anything.
yeah.
They don't try to defend themselves. That's the biggest problem. They don't try to defend themselves. And that's what happened with my daughter on Friday. She was going to give up that $10,000. Of course, the $10,000 wasn't for her, it was for her son. And she was just going to give it up.
That's per child?
She's only got the one.
Well, what if they have two?
I'm sorry?
What if they have two?
Well, he would owe child support for both kids. They had two. They only had
So that's 10,000 each?
Yeah. Well, in his case, this is in Florida, so all the rules are different. As a result of social isolation and often her economic dependence on the batterer, the woman falls more and more under his domination, of course. And his domination was a psychological domination. He told her that he was smarter than anybody else. He hated lawyers. So there was, and of course he would retaliate if she tried to leave the state. He would make sure that she never could leave the state. Of course, she was able to leave the state. So where did she go? She needed support, so where did she go? She came up to Iowa because that's where we were, so that we could protect her from her abuser, as odd as that may seem. I know. Strange situation. As she restricts her, of course, the other thing that you need to remember is that my daughter is only 4'11", and she almost weighs 100 pounds. Not quite, but she almost weighs 100 pounds. He weighs probably 250 and is 6'4". Yeah, he's big. He's a very large man. I can take him. So we better not give him any shit. Or I would die trying. As she restricts her outside activities and has less contact with friends or relatives, she grows increasingly fearful of the threats and attacks. And of course, that's one of the reasons why she came up to Iowa. She came up to Iowa so that we could protect her. She knew that I would die trying to protect her. She knew that her mother, military, Air Force colonel, would do whatever she needed to protect her. But she couldn't protect herself against him when she was down in Florida. Her self-esteem is diminished. She feels guilty and ashamed about what she sees as her multiple failures and shortcomings, and she also feels increasing rage and resentment toward her partner, whose control over her seems to grow. And of course, it does seem to grow. Here's a lady that is as tough as nails, but as far as he's concerned, she's a marshmallow. And really irritating to watch their interaction. Because her brother's down there. She's afraid that her brother's going to get in a fight with this guy. And of course, my son's going to win, because he actually has muscles. His arms look like my legs. I mean, they're so big. The woman grows hypervigilant. She notices subtle things, reactions by the batterer that others wouldn't recognize as a signal of upcoming violence. For example, his eyes may darken. This is something that we don't notice, we don't recognize. But of course, she's looking at him for subtle cues that she's about to get popped. These are signs that most people would not pick up. But of course she can pick them up because she knows if he squares himself toward her, then he's about to attack her. She knows that. Anybody else, they wouldn't even recognize. The heightened sensitivity to danger cues often motivates the woman to kill her assailant and accounts for her belief that she acted in self-defense. Of course, when she goes to court, the fact that these subtle cues were happening, the prosecuting attorney will attack those as, are you sure that's what was going to happen? How do you know that that was what was going to happen? This kind of stuff happens all the time, and people don't attack. People don't attack. What you're doing is you were hyper vigilant. He wasn't being dangerous toward you. That's what would happen as far as the prosecutor is concerned. And of course, the jury would agree with the prosecutor. Gee, my husband does that to me all the time. And then he never hits me. But, that's not a reason to kill somebody. The majority of the battered women charged with murdering their abusive partners are convicted. Most of them are convicted, except in the case in Phoenix, where she decapitated the guy. That's amazing. Research with mock juries has found that participants were more inclined to accept the woman's claim of self-defense when they heard from an expert testifying for the defense, an expert witness, and that's according to Schuler et al. In 2004. So they need an expert witness that needs to talk about the battered women syndrome. They need to use the battered women syndrome as a defense technique. The psychology of rape, misleading stereotypes about rape. Victims cannot be raped against their will. In other words, if the rape took place, then obviously they were willing to be raped. Reports of rape are often exaggerated or even faked. This is another myth. Some have an ideology that encourages the acceptance of myths about rape. According to Byrne in 1980, this ideology embraces the following beliefs. sexual conservatism, adversarial sexual beliefs, in other words, it's men against women, so it's a contest between men and women, who's going to win, acceptance of interpersonal violence, and sexual stereotyping. Women have long hair and wear dresses, and men have short hair and wear pants. That's a sexual stereotype. All right. So the more conservative the area, the less likely that they will convict rape. So if you live in a conservative area, Utah for example, or you live in this conservative South, you're less likely to get a conviction against rape because they're far more conservative. So their ideas about sex and about male and female interactions are completely different than they are in other parts of the country. Those more tolerant of rape are more likely to have traditional beliefs about gender roles, more adversarial sexual beliefs, greater needs for power and domination, heightened expressions of aggressiveness and anger. So if they accept all of these things, of course, they're less likely they are more likely to be tolerant of rape. So where does that bring pornography in? Where does pornography come in as far as accepting this type of behavior? Once upon a time they said that the more pornography people watched, the less likely women were to be raped. That was a theory. And it was intact for about 15 years.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought the theory was the other way around. The more you interact with it, the more violent you become.
Right. The more research we did, that's exactly what we discovered. That and the more individuals that we talked to who were rapists, like Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy would use violent pornography to cue himself before he would go out and rape someone. So he would use it to build up the tension. And once he built up the tension to a certain degree, he would go out and rape and murder someone. But he used pornography to cue himself. The same thing was true of the Boston Strangler. Did the same thing. He would use pornography to cue himself. So he would view violent pornography and then he would go out and he would do what he saw in the violent pornography. Most people that view pornography are not rapists. But instead of lessening the amount of rapes that occur, it actually seems to increase it. So we know that that's true. Now we know that that's true. But of course, for the longest time, for about 15 years, the theory was out there that the more pornography you viewed, the more you masturbated, therefore the less likely you were to rape somebody. The United States has one of the highest rates of forcible rape among the world's industrialized countries, although there has been some decrease in the last decade. So the number of forcible rapes in the United States is declining, or at least it has been declining. Now the question is, what kind of statistics are we going to get out of this administration? This administration is like the polar opposite of the last administration. So one of the things we may see is an increase in violent crime. It's possible. We'll have to wait to find out, to look at the statistics before we can determine that. We may see a lot more violent behavior. We may see, since this president supports the Second Amendment religiously, then potentially we'll see a lot more gun violence. So we'll see what happens. And of course, we did see the shooting in Las Vegas. According to the National Violence Against Women Survey, 17.6% of all women said that they had been victim of rape or attempted rape, and 21.6% of these women said they were younger than 12 years old at the time of their first rape. Why would somebody rape somebody that's younger than 12 years old? I don't have an answer for that. I have no answer for that. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Among rape victims, 31.5% reported being physically injured during their most recent rape. Almost 18 million women and almost 3 million men in the United States have been raped. Women who reported being raped as minors were twice as likely to report being raped as adults. Any idea why? Is there any rationale to that? At all?
Maybe just putting themselves in the same situations.
They allow themselves to be in the same situation? It seems like they would be hyper vigilant and they'd stay out of those situations. But the reality is they don't. One of the things that we know about people that drink is that they're more likely to be raped. So if we have a female that gets drunk, she's more likely to be sexually assaulted than somebody who is sober. It's not absolute, of course. But if a woman has been raped, she's twice as likely to be raped again as a woman that has never been raped. Isn't that odd? So they're putting themselves in the same situations. And actually, the same situation that we're dealing with may have something to do with alcohol. So they're trying to dissipate their feeling of being a victim by getting drunk. And when they get drunk, they're more likely to be raped. They did a study, and this is a kind of an old study, but they did a study where they had women who frequent bars. They had them writing in a diary and talking about what was happening to them at the bars. One of the things that they discovered was that men are angry. How does this work? Men are angrier at women who are drunk. Men they show more emotions to these select individuals. They also discovered that when the more the women drank, the more likely they were to be sexually assaulted. So it may be that they are going back, or they are putting themselves in situations that are more dangerous. Does that make sense? Because they're drinking more alcohol. And if they drink alcohol, they're more likely. The men are more likely to take advantage of it. So they're more likely to be raped. Really odd statistic. You would think it'd be the opposite. That if someone were raped, especially as a child, that they would be a little bit more hypervigilant. Well, one of the other things that we know about individuals that have been raped is a lot of times it destroys their self-esteem. And because of that, they don't think they're worthy or they're worth anything. Therefore, they're more likely to put themselves in a relatively dangerous situation. Women of all ages, social classes, and ethnic groups are vulnerable to rape. A high-risk age group are children and adolescents for most offenses, sexual as well as non-sexual, as well as women ages 18 to 24 for rape. One of the interesting things about rape is that the women that are raped the most are the women that are viable as far as producing children. So women who are within the birthing age range are more likely to be raped than women that are too young to have children or too old to have children. The women that are the most likely to be raped are the ones that are able to bear children. According to the National Violence Against Women study, only 19% of women and 13% of men who were raped after age 18 said their rape was reported to the police. Only 90% of women, 13% of men. Which means that 80%, 81% of women were raped and nobody ever found out about it. And of course, the statistics are even higher for men. So most of rapes are not being reported. We already knew that. So potentially we have statistics on rape, but the only rapes that we know about are the rapes that took place that were reported to the police. Okay, why are rape report rates low? Victims may think that reporting won't help. They would suffer further embarrassment as a result of the reporting. Law enforcement officers would not believe them. And actually, all of these things are true. It really doesn't, it doesn't help. Are they going to prosecute the rapist? A lot of times it doesn't happen. And of course, they do suffer further embarrassment when they have to go to court. And law enforcement officers do not believe them when they say that they've been raped. Many victims are afraid that the attacker will retaliate if charges are made, and these expectations are sometimes fulfilled, of course. This is one of the fears that my daughter had. She was never raped that I'm aware of anyway by her significant other, the father of her child, but he has threatened her with bodily injury if she didn't do what he told her to do. Experts have developed typologies of rapists. Most typologies have emphasized 4 factors that distinguish different types of rapists. Number 1, the type of aggression that the rapist used. What type of aggression did they use? Were they violent? Did they try to injure the individual? That's one type of rapist, or that's one of the things that we look at. When the level of aggression was high, whether it heightened sexual arousal in a sadistic manner. In other words, is he a sadistic rapist? That's one of the things that we look at as well. When we're trying to profile rapists, one of the things we need to determine is who is this guy and what type of damage is he going to do if he does it again. So we have to look at how sadistic he was when he raped somebody. Did he rip their clothes off? Did he cut them? Did he batter them while he was raping them? Whether the offender showed evidence of psychopathic or antisocial personality disorder, and usually that is when we look at the situation, we try to determine if this is all premeditated, what kind of horrible things has he put together in order to perpetrate the rape. You know, usually there is a scenario that he uses in his own mind. He's reliving a scenario in his own mind. So we have to determine if he's psychopathic or antisocial in his behavior, whether the offender relied on deviant sexual fantasies to produce sexual arousal. In other words, this individual has a problem with normal sexual functioning, and because of that, did he do something to the individual? Did he force the individual to do something? Did he select clothing on them? Did he force them to do one thing or another? So what we're looking for is a whole scenario of what this guy has to do in order to get sexually aroused. Does he have to beat somebody up in order to get sexually aroused? Whew. Okay, why don't we stop right here, since this is like this is what we do whenever we're looking for a serial rapist. We try to profile this select individual to determine if they are psychopathic, whether they're sadistic, what type of fantasies they use. You know, he kept squeezing a Mickey Mouse doll. Okay, what does that mean? You think I'm kidding? A lot of times it's a stuffed animal, and they're using these things to get sexually excited, as horrible as that may seem. Anyway, we'll talk more about this next time. I know, what a horrible subject. So last time we were talking about child abuse, this time we're talking about rape. Oh my God. What kind of horrible class is this? I lost Shelley. What? Curtis? That's what Curtis says. Oh, I forgot to turn it off. So how did Boston do?
Oh, I missed it.